Welcome to They Think It's Also Us, Mr. Scott Pearson.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
We're good, although you've just had to deal with what we describe as the Mare Street Studios demonic cleaner.
Yes. I locked the door to the toilet and then she came and told me I needed to get out and use a different toilet.
By the way, when we were downstairs, we were about to get in the lift and she was over by another toilet. And by the time we got up here, it was already set out and she was there.
I
It's
think
like she has the
she's
ability to fucking teleport.
She's a ghoul. Every single guest we have in is like, do you mind if I just use the bathroom before like we start recording? And whether it's like 8 a.m, 9 a.m, or 4 p.m, she's like, you can't use this toilet, leave.
Maybe it's like a secret entrance to like an MI5 building or something. Like maybe you can't actually ever use it.
Speakeasy.
Producer G, who isn't here, I think he's actually got into a lot of verbal arguments with her, like quite like heated.
Oh, really?
She's the protector.
Yeah.
Maybe there's like 3 secret words and a handshake we have to do, and then she'll allow us into her bathroom. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We're so excited. We met via the wonderful and caring and kind Millie Gooch at Lucky Saints. What was that? Dry Jan?
It was like was it like a celebration? It was a celebration of something.
Yeah, us, I
Clearly
think,
quite
and our
memorable
friendship,
for me.
because well, do you know what was so nice though? That was one of the first times in my sobriety I'd gone to a pub, met new people, and we just had a real fucking
We did.
laugh.
We had
Like it
such
was
a
really,
laugh.
really fun. And then you guys went and did Millie's. Did you do a dinner together?
Was it Sober Spring?
We did do Sober Spring, but you weren't there for that, were you?
No. I think I was on the other side of the world actually.
Oh, jet set babe
I was
over
probably
there.
in Rotherham.
Brilliant. Yeah, that was good. That was I can't remember where it was. It was somewhere in Hammersmith.
Yeah, it was it the Hoxton?
That's right.
Yes.
That's exactly
The
where it was.
Hoxton in Hammersmith.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fuck, man.
The Hoxton,
People
not
need
in
to rethink
Hoxton.
about their branding, don't they? Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's ridiculous. Well, where do you want to meet? The Hoxton. Where are you going to go to? Hoxton. Oh,
Yeah.
Hammersmith. Fuck. Isn't there a Hoxton in Hoxton?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's one in Southwark.
But listen, I'm not complaining. The further west for me, the better.
I'm pissed off about
Yeah,
it.
you were loving life.
Yeah, anytime everyone goes, oh, it's east, I'm like, I'm busy.
Yeah.
But
I'm busy.
but no, it was like 10 minutes from the studio, so it was great. But that was nice. That was a
It
really
was
nice
lovely.
evening.
Very good food.
Yeah,
Good
and we
food.
just had
Shit company, but you know.
Oh, you can't have it as is.
I would rather have gone to dinner with the cleaner. Oh, shall we?
We shall. Straight into Jamie's time machine. Let's just
Doors open. Tom won't let me wear a helmet in this time machine because he's a reckless driver, so you can choose whether you do or do not wish to wear a helmet in my time machine. Here we go.
There we go. We're back, young Scott.
Yeah.
First memories of alcohol. What were they?
Do you know what? Interestingly, they're all like really quite happy in the sense that, like, so basically my mum's side of the family are from East London. Like my nan was literally like born in like Bow Bells kind of vibe.
Right.
And then my dad is like Glaswegian. So like if you think about like drinking culture of like kind of working class East London and like deep dark Glasgow, it's not really the best mix, to be honest. Like it was only really going to ever end
Stick
one
that
way.
one in the blender, see where we go.
Literally. But that being said, like my family, especially because I kind of primarily lived in London, everything was like centered around alcohol in the sense that like we would get together on a Friday night or a Saturday night and we would play games and we would all sit around the table and all the adults would play cards and me and my cousins would kind of just run around and kind of have loads of fun. So alcohol was always like present, but it was always kind of marked with a sense of like happiness because my family just enjoyed each other's company. So those memories for me are actually like really positive, to be honest. That was my first memories, I would say, of the stuff.
That's great because I think like not everyone's journey with alcohol is doom and gloom from the get-go.
No.
For some people it is, and it's what we based our whole live show on, was like the good, the bad and the ugly, which for the majority of people is sort of the timeline. Starting with like, oh, it's kind of harmless, it's a bit fun, and fairly potentially happy memories, but we will kind of know where it goes. So yeah, I guess like growing up, how did alcohol play a part in your life? I guess kind of going into like teenage years, was there teen drinking going on?
So I think what's interesting, right, is if I think about it almost in segments, like the kind of like young initial version of like when I was exposed to alcohol was probably quite happy. then without going into too much detail, alcoholism runs in both sides of my family quite heavily, I would say, now with the gift of hindsight and looking back at certain things that happened over the years. So I would say that at some point over that kind of maybe from about 8 onwards, I started to maybe notice that it was too present,
Right.
especially for some of my family. And then whether or not that impacted the way that I drank or not, I'm not sure. I don't think you'll ever know, right? There's too many variables. But I do remember kind of maybe 14, 15, I started smoking at school. Sorry, Mum. And then I kind of like got in with what I would now consider the wrong crowd. And,
Sure.
and through lots of therapy and looking back on stuff, I realized that I was doing that to protect myself because people had started to comment on the fact that I was gay.
Right.
And I think like I saw it as a coping mechanism because it was like, oh, if I hang out with the kids that are like really hard and naughty, then that protects me to a degree. And it kind of did, to be honest. So I felt quite lucky in that sense that I'd found something. So smoking was almost like the first addiction, shall we say.
Sure.
And then I would say probably 15, 16, it was just go over the park and have a bottle of WKD or Smirnoff Ice. And it wasn't problematic, but I do remember it really well. And what I most remember is that feeling of like when you have that first drink, all of a sudden my mind just went really quiet. And I think it was like the first time in my life I'd understood what like a quiet mind was. And now as an adult, I kind of realize what that really means. But at the time I just didn't. I just assumed that everyone's mind had 14,000 voices every second going on in them. So yeah.
That's really fascinating. I was going to ask, like in your journey, and obviously with the platform you've built now about, proud and sober, how much did that, or do you think maybe consciously or subconsciously, like how do you come out at that point? Because you said people started commenting on you being gay, and obviously go into as much or as little detail as you want, but do you think that also played a part into you, like you say, like kind of wanting that protection from people and hanging out with the wrong crowd? Because times were different, even we're not that old, but...
Yeah, I mean, it was, I remember actually that maybe when I was about 12 or 13, I was walking home from school with a guy that I was in my class, and we used to get the bus home together. And I remember one night walking down the road with him. It was a really big, long road. And we were talking, and I said, oh, have you heard what other people have been commenting about me? And he was like, yeah. And I remember so vividly, it's so sad now when I think about it, but I remember so vividly looking at him and going, well, if you see me acting gay, can you nudge me so that I can stop?
Wow.
And at the time, I didn't really realize how deep and powerful it was that I was trying to change who I was to be more, I guess, acceptable to other people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think whether it was conscious or not, there was definitely a part of me that definitely kind of hung out with those people for a sense of protection. And I came out when I was 15, but I wouldn't say I came out to like everyone. So I came out to my mum and my stepdad kind of first. That was the first phase, if you like. And that was fine. But I think that I then had to try and figure out how to navigate that with other people. So like just as I left senior school, that was when I kind of told my friends at school and stuff that this was who I was. But that was quite early, like 15 years old is quite young.
Really is.
And I now debate, my partner's kind of 35 and he didn't come out until kind of 5 years ago. And we have this debate because he's like, oh, it must have been so much easier for you to come out so early. And I'm like, yeah, it was, but I was also really immature and young and I didn't know how to cope with other people's opinion of that.
Yeah.
Whereas as an adult, you kind of are a fully formed person and you don't rely on other people as much. So yeah.
And kids can be really cruel.
Yeah.
And I think especially, I think you're a bit younger than us. But how old are you, if I'm asking?
I'm 34.
Okay, barely. But like the word gay was just thrown around like an insult back there. Like and I don't consider us really old, but I look at like the culture online now and the way people talk and how inclusive it is and how wonderful and safe it feels. Obviously there's a long way to go, but compared to how my friends who came out when we were like 18, 19, it was a whole different world, wasn't it? And I saw them go through that. So yeah, I think 15 is exceptionally brave.
Yeah.
To do that.
It was, I don't know why, it just kind of felt, actually one of my friends came out around the same time and I think it was kind of one of those where I was like, oh, it is okay to do that. but yeah, I mean, to your point, I remember like, oh, that's so gay would just be used as like a quite a common phrase, and it didn't really ever bother me back then. But now, if someone says it, like, obviously, it's like you're almost using it to describe something negative.
Yeah,
and it is. If I hear someone say it, it's like a little gut punch for me now, and I'm like, ooh, like, come on now, we can do better than that in 2024.
Yeah, because I suppose back, being not that there's an excuse for it, but I think when you're maybe in school 14, 15, 16, especially back when we were there, maybe you could put it down to like just naivety, uneducational, but like you said, I think there's absolutely no excuse now. And it does seem to be like you said, Jamie, I think the kind of culture now does feel a lot more inclusive and accepting. I'm not sure if it would make it any easier coming out at 15 now as opposed to back then, but maybe, I don't know.
Do you know what I do actually? I really hope that it is better for kids now, because I think the thing to remember is that my parents grew up under the generation of kind of the Maggie Thatcher era, where it was like literally against the law to speak about promoting a gay family or gay love. So I think that naturally kind of almost makes it unacceptable to some people, whether or not they kind of consciously or unconsciously see that happening. That's kind of what happens. Whereas now I think we're parents, well, I'm not, but you are, and like you have kind of lived through a generation where you understand the context of these things. So actually for you, like, I'm sure that like if your son did for whatever reason turn out to be gay, like you would be like, oh, okay, that's fine, because you know gay people, you've experienced them, and we're not like the devil,
Well, exactly. It's
not like the cleaner.
Not like the cleaner.
Fuck that cleaner. Well, no, exactly. I guess it is like social conditioning, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like you say, like the kind of the Thatcher era versus now when everything.
Speaking of devils,
but yeah, everything's much more acceptable. So yeah, you'd like to think that it would be, but I guess like tying this back into, I suppose, alcohol around that time, do you feel like there was a correlation perhaps between coming out and drinking, or was it very much still, relatively fun teen drinking, going to the park, WKD, Smirnoff, at what point did it, start ramping up, if that's a...
Yeah, do you know what? It's interesting because, as with everything in my life, I tended to go from 0 to 100 quite quickly.
Right.
So it was like started quite kind of normal, shall we say, in inverted commas, and then I actually kind of, when I left school, I chose to go to college in central London, and it was a kind of fashion retail college. So my college was kind of in Tottenham Court Road, so basically in Soho. So I was actually exposed to Soho from literally the age of kind of like 15, 16. And I did kind of go straight into some of the bars in Soho because they were kind of maybe a bit more relaxed on ID and stuff back then. I did have a fake ID at one point. And I would say that at that point is when my drinking really changed, and I was drinking to escape. And again, not conscious, but it really kind of changed because I was in this world that felt so big and so vibrant and so free, and it was kind of the early 2000s, so it was kind of there was debauchery in the air, and there was a specific kind of club scene in London that, I'll be honest, I've got some memories that I would never change. Like I experienced kind of the rise of Jodie Harsh when she first came onto the scene and things like that, and those are memories that I will cherish forever because there are experiences that you can't replicate, and I wouldn't be able to go and find them now in a club if I tried. So I think that there was a level of like, oh my God, this is so fabulous and fantastic, and I went and worked in fashion PR for a little while when I was kind of 17 and 18. And that was all amazing. But then there was this like insidious part to it where once I started, I couldn't stop. And I would go out for like drinks after college. And then before I know it, I'd be like chucking up in the toilets. And that was common. It wasn't once in a while. It was common that I would take it to that level. And then when I kind of hit 18, 19, all bets were off, because at that point I'm of age. I can go and do it as much
Yeah.
as I want. No one can hold me back, and I can go in any bar I want, and I can buy whatever drink I want, and with that comes unlimited access.
Of course.
And then that's when the real fun starts.
Were you aware at this point in time that like it had potential to be problematic, or was it still, you know, were you around people where that was also quite common and it could just be kind of brushed under the carpet as perhaps normality?
I definitely wasn't aware of it at that point. Definitely not. I vividly remember just thinking that I was like everyone else. And the excuse that I used to use with myself was because I didn't go to uni at that period of my life. I was like, well, I'm not at uni and everyone else is doing this at uni, so I can just do this now.
Yeah.
What I didn't factor in was that everyone else kind of leaves uni at 21, 22, but I kind of carried on doing it. So the excuse ran out, you know?
No, that's really interesting, because I remember like I left school quite early and started touring and doing a load of band stuff. Jamie was incidentally managing me at the time for a brief period.
Look how that went.
And
Love that.
but I remember that's the same thing that I felt, because when between like 18 and 21, I was like, well, all my mates were at uni getting fucked up and I'm just on tour getting fucked up. So, hey, it's fine.
Yeah.
But then I remember everyone started finishing uni and working, and then I'm still on a bus or a van, not even that glamorous, getting fucked up. But yeah, I agree with that kind of similarity. You kind of, that was my justification in my head in hindsight, but you don't realise until later down the line, right?
Yeah.
So
it's amazing how we can kid ourselves.
What would a night out look like for you, 18, 19, 20-year-old Scott in London?
It would have been kind of normally, because of, like my parents lived in Essex, I would generally try to stay in London basically from Thursday night all the way through till Monday. So it would either be staying at a friend's house or in a hotel. And I would just get ready with my friends, go. Normally at that point it was like heaven. And we would go there. That was where the night would begin. And then the night probably wouldn't end for a day or two. And it would, I mean, I loved the experience back then, but it was that thing of once I started, I didn't stop. And it was kind of almost the only thing that stopped me in hindsight was the fact that I had work on a Monday morning. So that would be like my, oh, okay, Sunday morning scaries, I need to go home now. I now need to like basically go to bed for the whole of Sunday to wake up Monday to start work again. But again, I just used to kid myself. I used to just be like, well, it's like everyone at uni's doing this, so it doesn't matter, and I can just carry on doing it. And it was also part of the culture of the time for me and my friends. So because all of my friends were doing it as well, I think I just thought that it was normal. But I think the thing that I didn't see was that they didn't have that, like, I would be counting my drinks because I knew that there was a line for me. And it wasn't because I was trying to moderate, it was because I was trying not to black out.
right.
Blackouts came for me really early. So I would be like really trying not to get to that blackout point. Inevitably, I would always end up there. And no matter how much I tried or didn't, I would always find the line and just drive over it anyway, to be honest.
That's interesting. And consequences of blacking out while drinking, what were they for you?
I mean, and this is where the kind of, I guess, the patterns, I guess, start in that I would not go home for a few days. I would wake up in bed with the wrong person. There was kind of drain my bank account because I'd have spent all my money. I mean, there was a time where I kind of was in a club in Soho. I got kicked out, I think partially because I was still drunk. Too drunk. And then as I left, someone stole my phone from my pocket. And it was back in the time where like there wasn't Uber. This was like pre-Uber. And then without a mobile phone, the only logical explanation for me was to walk from basically Soho to Liverpool Street at like 3 a.m. There's another time I like came out of a club with no shoes on, like, and had to like walk from St Paul's to Stratford, like. And when you really think about, like, when I think about that now, I'm like, what on earth? Like, how did I allow myself to get to such a level that I didn't have any bloody shoes and I had to walk kind of, what is that, an hour's walk, 2 hours walk?
Who's got them? What did you trade them for?
Well, who knows?
A jewel? Like,
It was. Do you know what as well? It was, remember those the like early 2000s. They were like really flat shoes, and they were like really thin leather with laces.
Oh, yeah.
And like literally, like I had like these silver ones. I remember they were like bright silver, metallic, and they just disappeared one night. Still don't know where they ended up. If anyone finds them, please let me know.
someone somewhere's got them.
Someone
They're
somewhere.
like, I
has
found
got-
these once on the street out in Toncourt Road.
Literally, yeah.
How did you feel like, because we talk about this a lot, and this was a big pattern in my sort of drink and drug taking, was that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I'd feel fucking horrific
Yeah.
and really low.
Yeah.
But then Thursday would come around, someone would call me and I'd be like, sweet, we go again. And then that obviously just throws you to the bottom of the mountain very quick. How did you feel on those Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays in your early 20s? Was it celebratory war stories, or did you start to be like, oh, this isn't good?
I would say from quite early in my 20s, I was cognizant that this way of living wasn't for me, but I didn't really know what that meant or how to navigate it.
Right.
So I would say that, like, actually, I would wake up on a Monday with the best intentions, and I would be like, right, it's a new week. I'm going to try and be a bit healthier this week, and kind of it would be fine. But inevitably by Monday night, especially when I worked in PR, you'd get an invite for something and then you'd be out that night, and then all bets are off again.
Yeah.
And mostly work was an anchor, but to be honest, by 20, it was impacting work as well. Like I was going out almost every night of the week, and going in hungover or not going in at all, and definitely started to kind of notice the impact. I remember actually when I worked in PR that there was a time where I was pulled into the office and they kind of said to me, like, you're so good at what you do that if you just applied yourself, you could be like really great, but you're like not here enough, and we're going to pay you your sick leave even though you've got the highest sick leave in the whole building, but like you need to get a hold of this, because if you don't, you're not going to have a career. And I vividly remember that conversation, and I was only like maybe 18, 19 at the time.
Wow.
And that's how early it was beginning for me. Like when I think about that, that was my employer basically saying to me.
That's quite
"You've got a
interesting
problem."
that like it got picked up on.
Yeah.
Because was it, I mean, I guess trying to compare industries, do you think there was a certain allowance of working in PR that gave you, license to probably party maybe more than most careers?
Definitely, because a big part of the job was socializing and making connections. So, and all of the work that we did was basically organizing big parties for big brands. So the job is synonymous with partying. What I didn't realize was that the people in their kind of late 20s, early 30s had kind of cracked the code and were almost like not drinking because it was work for them. But for me, it was just this glamorous party where I could just go and do whatever I wanted, which is absolutely not true, but that's just what I thought.
No, I was the exact same. And it's funny because now, I think even in my later days of drinking, like I'd look at people that were kind of in their early 20s off their nut at a work event and be like, what are you fucking doing? But that was me for so long. Just like, I'm the fun one. And everyone was like, you're the dickhead.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Oh, mate.
definitely.
Well, it's just hard. I suppose, like, I always kind of question, had I chosen a different career, whether, I would have got as derailed perhaps as I did, and whether that would have, like, negated the need to actually go sober.
Or the sort of nature versus nurture.
Yeah, like whether I'd gone, but, that...
I think, I can say for me, I think the job didn't help, and I think it definitely exacerbated and glamorized the culture. But I think I was programmed, or I certainly had a way of thinking and being that I would have gone down a path. I just don't know how far down the path I would have gone.
I completely agree with you. And actually, like, when I look back now at my kind of almost timeline, I'm glad that was my path, because it led me to sobriety at 28. Like, I'm so glad that was how it worked out for me, because in all instances it was 0 to 100 really quickly, and a lot of that was due to the environment making it more accessible and acceptable. Great, because it got me there sooner, because otherwise I could have been in this like pain like constantly
For a lot longer. Yeah, I mean, okay, so you stopped at 28. When did you want to stop?
I'd say there's two parts to that. I would say the first time my parents sat me down was probably a really pivotal moment, and I think I was about 21, 22.
Right.
And I do vividly remember that conversation, and them kind of saying to me, "Listen, we don't think that the way that you drink is that normal. Like you don't stop once you start, and we never know where you're going to end up," kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I was really arrogant and was just like, well, everyone's doing it and I'm 21, like, give me a break, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
That was, I would say, the kind of first moment where I would say that because someone else had reflected it back to me, it almost validated what I think I already knew, but I just wasn't really sure. And then I would say when I knew I needed to stop and that I wanted to, so when I knew I needed to stop, probably 24, 25, when I wanted to, 28. So it was almost 10 years, kind of eight years for me, I would say, in total.
So mad, because everyone's has around that timeline, isn't it?
Yeah, mine would have been 10 years I didn't enjoy it, I clocked it. 5 years I was desperate to stop, and 4 years after that it took me to stop.
7-year itch.
It is, but mate, it's so true, because I remember so many times I don't understand why I do it. It would be like, I don't want to go out tonight. Actually, our guest last week, Nick, summed it up perfectly. I was like an anxious mess before going out.
Yeah.
I'd be like, I don't want to go out, and my partner would be like, oh, but we've got to go see my friends, or it's so-and-so's birthday. And in my head, I'd be like, I wish I had the strength, or you actually had the nuance to see that I was struggling, to be like, don't worry, stay at home. And I'd push through it. And my only way to like quieten the stress and anxiety and whatever it fucking was in my brain would be then to get there and be like, Jamie's here, and like forget, almost literally like leave that version of my brain at home and then the other version come out.
Yeah.
That was like 5 years of my life of just like trying to push.
Quite torturous looking back at it.
It's
isn't it?
awful to do that to yourself. Yeah. And I think that's what for me anyway, that's where cocaine plays into it so much, because that just like set my brain in a different way, quietened down actually a lot of that anxiety until you then get home and then you're like, no.
Doing the luge, questioning.
No. So, okay, let's go back. So your parents set you down at 21. Did that hit?
No, I definitely was. I just left the conversation being like, oh, they're really annoying, aren't they? Like, how dare they try and interrupt my fun?
Yeah.
Like a
so what was your next?
20-year-old.
What was your next sort of like kink in the road?
I think it was. So I got into a relationship when I was about 24, and we both liked to drink, and we both drank quite a lot. And I think that throughout that relationship, my drinking definitely got worse, but I think also ours did in the relationship. And I would say that is definitely where the real work inside me began, in the sense that like on a daily basis, I would wake up and be like, oh, I'm just not going to drink today. I'm just not going to drink today. And then by 4 o'clock, something would be like scratching my back, being like, oh, well, it's 4 o'clock now, you could have one. And that kind of debate with myself and the kind of cognitive dissonance of don't do it, do it, don't do it, do it, was so all-consuming that like I would give in just to quiet the noise, which is so silly now when I think back to it, and I wish I had made different choices. But I guess that's part of the process of going through and accepting something, right? Like you have to almost grieve the situation. Yeah. And similar to the relationship, I think I grieved my relationship with alcohol while I was doing that work. But I was drinking a lot at that point. I mean, it was probably 3 or 4 bottles of red wine a night, which, and I remember there's like photos of me back then where like all my face is just like so bloated, and like I've got no kind of jawline. It's literally just kind of like cheekbones to shoulders kind of vibe. But more than that, I was in emotional pain every day. Like I was exhausted by myself, and that was a lot to take. I was exhausted by my own bullshit, is the way I would probably say it.
Let's I suppose go, because I don't want to dwell too much on like the carnage eras.
Yeah.
But the sort of week up until you decided to stop, what did it look like? What was stopping and going, right, that's it? What did it look like for you? Was there like a, not like a rock bottom, but was there like a pivotal moment that was just like, well, this is it then?
Yeah, so in the year that I gave up, I lost my granddad in the July, and he was a really pivotal character for me. He was kind of like my dad when my dad wasn't around when I was younger. And I always really respected and loved him. And I lost him in the July. And by that point, I already knew that I was going to give up, and it was a case of when, not if. So when I lost him, I think I kind of used that as an excuse to kind of go on a few benders, and did that for a couple of months. And then in the September, I was about to start a new job at where I am now, actually. And I said to myself, right, we need to make an exit plan here. This needs to, like, we're done. We've covered everything we can cover. We've exhausted all avenues.
Gold medal.
We've done everything.
Final
Like,
boss
you're a high
completed, yeah.
achiever. You've managed to high achieve on this one as well. Well done. And so I just kind of like, I said to myself on the 1st of January, 2019, that's it. But what I said, the deal that I made with myself was that in between the end of September and the 1st of January is if something big was happening, so like, I don't know, a birthday party for a friend or whatever, then I was allowed to drink, but I wasn't allowed to drink any other nights of the week. What was quite interesting was that the following 2 weeks, I had 2 leaving parties from people that were really close to me in the business that I used to work at. And they were on the Thursdays, both were on Thursdays, two consecutive Thursdays. So I went to the first one. I hadn't drank for the whole week, went out on the first Thursday, got absolutely annihilated, like blacked out, was sick, everything. Woke up the next day and was like, this is hell. Like, why have I done this? This is so silly. And then the next week it happened again. It was another leaving do. This time I took it a bit further. I ended it being sick again, blacked out. And I woke up on the 13th of October, 2018. Literally, that was the Friday morning. And I literally woke up and I was like, that's it. We're done now. And it sounds so cliche, and I've said this so many times to people, but like it was like for the first time my like body, mind and spirit were just all completely connected. And there was no dissonance anymore. There was no arguing. There was no debating with myself. It was like the hangover that I had that day was genuinely the worst hangover I've ever had. It was like all of them came back at the same time. And I like physically couldn't get out of bed. Like I was like crawling to the bar. Like it was horrible. Like my body was in bits. But my mind was even more exhausted. And I literally just woke up and I was like, that's it. Enough. And that was it.
Wow. I think that's an amazing way of putting it, actually. Your mind was exhausted, because I feel the same. Like my sort of ending wasn't even like the craziest night that will go down in history. Something happened on that Monday when I woke up and was like, nah, you're out.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really nice way of putting it. Your mind is exhausted.
Yeah.
How were the first weeks, months? Did you embrace it fully?
I did. Do you know what? It's really funny because so my actual sober date falls on my best friend's birthday. So I've actually moved my date so that she can enjoy her birthday, which we don't ever really talk about, but I've just said it publicly.
How selfish.
I know. But so it actually worked out that on her birthday was my first sober day. And I remember, like, me and her lived together at the time, and I remember her, I think she thought, oh, this is just a phase. Like, there's no way he's going to do it. Because she'd seen me, like, get up in the morning and drink from a bottle of white wine at 9 a.m. Like, she'd seen the worst of me. So I don't think she fully bought that was what was going to happen. But I do remember, like, that night, she had loads of friends coming over for her birthday. And it wasn't going to be a big night, but it was going to be, there was just loads of girls coming around and we were all going to sit and get drunk and have fun. And I kind of said to her that morning, I was like, oh, by the way, I'm not drinking tonight. And I don't really think at that point I had been ready to vocalize to everyone else that was me done, because I think I still needed to accept it myself. But I knew for sure that I wasn't going to drink that night. And I remember going for a run just before they got there. And I don't even know why, because I must have listened or read something about like the endorphins that you get from a run, and I think I must have desperately clung on to the fact that if I went for a run and felt happy, I wouldn't need to drink. And it worked. It really worked. That carried me through. I stayed up until 1 o'clock in the morning, and then I went to bed and I didn't drink. And I just kept having to do that every day. Every day I woke up and I was like, okay, we're just not going to do it today. And then there was that, like, I don't know if you guys experienced this, but like the first maybe like week or two, I was just so emotional all the time. I remember, like, I lived in the Olympic Village in Stratford, and I remember like I was walking across a bridge at one point and I saw like this sunset. I just burst into tears. and I remember, I've got the photo on my phone now. I literally took a photo of it and I sent it to like one of my friends, and I was like, oh, isn't this sunset beautiful? And they were like, who are you? Like, what? But I was so emotional. And in hindsight, I think it was relief. I was relieved that I wasn't having to debate myself or question myself or wonder when it was going to go wrong for me. And I mean, I genuinely believed that I was going to die because of alcohol. Like, that was a strong held belief of mine. I always kind of stupidly joked that I was going to be a part of the 27 Club. Like, that was kind of what I saw in my future. So to not have that happen, I think was just quite emotional for me. And to know that I didn't have to question it anymore was just a relief.
But also, I think, like, describing that, I think that's one of the things that sobriety brings as well, is obviously, you know, I'm sure part of it was relief, but just actually enjoying those kind of moments of beauty, you start to appreciate those little things way more anyway.
Yeah.
You know, it's just suddenly where you wouldn't have even thought about it. I mean, I'm the same. I still drive in sometimes and have these amazing sunsets. Whereas before, I wouldn't be driving in because I'd have been my car off and I'd be like in bed still. I'd miss the sunrise or like the sunset or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So, you know,
my mates from football were always like, Jay, you post so many fucking pictures of the sky. I'm like, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I was driving home the other night and I was like, looked up and was like, beautiful, no clouds, and there was so many stars, and that sounded like a fucking wet wipe. I'm just like, I do feel so much more like grounded now, whereas before I wouldn't have noticed any of that shit.
you wouldn't.
I would just be like,
Yeah, it's true.
Well, that's amazing. And so your first like 6 months of sobriety, so aside from being, you know, emotional,
Yeah,
for
very
the first
emotional.
you know, couple of weeks, how did you feel? What did your first 6 months look like and feel like?
It was, I would describe it as Bambi on ice, to be honest. It was a collection of, can I go there? Can I see that person? Where's the line?
Yeah.
Because previously for me, the line had been so far in the distance and I'd always cross it anyway.
And I'd probably
that
snort
finding a new line was, yeah, exactly. That finding a new line was just completely alien to me.
Yeah.
And there was a process of, there were certain friends that I associated with drinking and who I have the best memories with and I love dearly now because we've got so many incredible memories and we've seen so much together. But I knew that those relationships would change. And again, I think I had to start grieving that. I think I had to start grieving that there was this version of me out in the world that wouldn't exist anymore. And I would say that was the first 6 months for me. It was very much a like trial and error. What do I like? What do I not like? I don't know what I like without a drink anymore because I just used to drink through everything.
Yeah.
So, and I like, now I know that, you know what, I don't like being in clubs. I don't like, I've pushed myself into those places in the last kind of 6 years of sobriety. And if the timing's right and if I'm with the right people and the music's brilliant, then yeah, I'll have a good night. But is it somewhere that I would like naturally lean into? No.
Yeah.
And I'm absolutely delighted that I now know that about myself.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to like push myself into places that I just don't want to be anymore. And it was that, I think, for the first 6 months, it was, didn't go to clubs, didn't go to bars, had to see different people, spent most of the time, to be honest, reading sobriety literature and listening to podcasts and meeting people anonymously online about being sober because I didn't know how to handle it, and met Millie, for example, like on Instagram really quickly, and
amazing.
Thankfully, like our relationship has been one of my constants throughout sobriety, so I've been really lucky in that sense.
Sounds like you had a lot of self-awareness though, because we speak to a lot of people, and I probably put myself in this, that like maybe didn't even clock it or like know how to clock it. It sounds like even from your early sobriety you kind of knew, consciously or subconsciously, like kind of some of the steps you needed to make and like put those boundaries in place, which I think is really impressive.
I think that is all down to the fact that I was listening to sober podcasts and reading sober literature for a good 6 months before I stopped.
Right.
Interesting.
So I learned from the greats, like Catherine Gray's Unexpected Joy of Being Sober.
Yeah.
I literally bought that book for someone recently because they've kind of told me that they think they might have a bit of a problem.
She's amazing, by the way. Like when we met her, A, we were so like dumbfounded that she'd even consider coming on, and B, like she is almost this sort of, you know, guru in the space and the one that everyone looks to. And I don't think that comes with any preconception that someone's going to be a dickhead at all. But like when she sat down, it was just like sitting down with a mate, and she was just amazing.
She was
and
class.
like the way she went into it and she's truly inspirational, I think, actually, in this space, because she
one of the
really did
OGs.
like pioneer it. It was true. And
Yeah.
you know, we were talking about it on our Patreon Zoom last night. It's like, you know, there has been a bit of like a jazz hands around sobriety recently. So like to have people like that we can really look up to, that have done it super authentically.
Yeah.
Because there are some unauthentic people in any space, right? So I think like we loved her.
She is, as far as I am aware, the first person really that kind of spoke publicly about the non-AA sober route.
Yeah.
And that was what I needed. Like that book was released, I think maybe the year before I considered sobriety. So to find it, and also we share a really similar like path, Catherine and I, like she kind of worked in the kind of PR fashion industry
I remember
world.
saying, it's very...
So to read those pages, I remember the first chapter. I want to reread the book now actually, because it means so much to me. But I remember reading that first chapter and just crying and being like, oh my God, this is me. And she gave me that gift, as she's given many of us that gift in the book that she wrote. So yeah, I will always be eternally grateful to Catherine for that.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, we talk about it in an episode about the sober spectrum.
Yeah.
How, yeah, I mean, there could be people that drink like 2 drinks a week that go sober, and then there's the people that have drunk 200 drinks a week that go sober. Still the same thing, right?
Yeah, it's
But
still sobriety.
It's still sobriety,
Yeah.
but also that means that everyone's recovery journey is different. You know, so for certain people, the stopping isn't necessarily as big of a challenge, perhaps, as another person. And, you know, we kind of found that in sort of like the recovery journeys that the guests that we speak to. And, you know, for myself and Jamie as well, we very similar, didn't need to go to AA or go to rehab. Found that there's so many amazing resources now, you know, like Catherine Gray and the
Podcasts are great, I hear,
yeah. And you know, the literature and and all the science around it as well, which gives you a real understanding. That luckily for me, that was enough to go.
Yeah.
And we talk about all the time, this podcast again is great accountability for us, as well as, you know, the other people that enjoy it and find it helps them.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for that. And, you know, by the sounds of it, you're very similar. You know, it was kind of through literature, through finding a community, through that keeps you on a path.
Yeah, the community bit, to be honest, is the bit that it's so similar to how you've got this podcast. I had an Instagram account back in the day. It wasn't under the same title it is at the moment, and it started as an anonymous sharing online every day of how I was feeling about being sober, because I was still figuring out how I wanted to talk about it and what label I wanted to use for myself and blah blah blah. And I think there was a certain switch point where I knew, oh, this is now the way that I'm going to live my life. And it wasn't, I just completely accepted and embraced that I was going to be sober, and that was a label that I felt comfortable to use. And it was at that point that I kind of changed, and the page was less about my experience, as in like I was almost doing like a daily share kind of thing of, oh, I felt like this today, blah blah blah. And it kind of almost changed, and it was more about like how I was living my life as a sober person, but then quite critically, how do we start to connect other people? And the main thing for me that I found it back to that kind of early 6 months is anyone finds it relatively lonely in the first 6 months to a year, I would say, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done to understand who you are. I would say that as a gay man, trying to be a gay man in a kind of in a community that really does double down on alcohol and partying, that was even more isolating because I felt like an outsider again. So it was almost like another coming out.
Yeah.
And so to kind of then go, wait, so I'm a gay man, but I'm sober. How the hell am I going to meet someone now? Like from a relationship perspective, but also from a friend perspective. Like,
Sure.
I don't know where other sober gay men are. And does it mean that I need to go to AA to meet them because that might be my only way? Or how does that work? And that, to be honest, was where Proud and Sober was born, because it was like, no, if it doesn't exist, create it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what happened, to be honest.
I think that's amazing because, like you
good.
say, we've had guests on from sort of the LGBTQ plus space before, and they've always said like it is so entrenched in the culture for whatever reason. Whether that's just like how people identify or like how they connect or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think it's amazing what you've done, and I guess one of the questions I wanted to ask was kind of being the one that's created the platform. How have you seen it help other people? And without sort of patting yourself on the back too much, although you should, how has it felt kind of helping other people in that space?
I've always, it's weird, right? Because I've kind of been doing it for 5 years now, and if I'm honest, right now I'm in a period of reflection around the whole thing, because there's so many other great communities being built, and there's lots of there's lots of queer club nights now that are sober, and I'm so glad that that's where we're at, because it kind of almost feels like there's not so much of a need for some of the work that I've done before, and I love that we're there. The most valuable and I guess rewarding moments for me have always been the really small moments where I've like organized a community event, and like out of the corner of my eye, maybe sometimes 10 people turn up, maybe sometimes it's 30, you never really know, sometimes it's one, but out of the corner of your eye you see someone exchanging numbers with someone else. And it always gets me really emotional when I think about it, because if me creating that space and me getting stressed about finding a venue and paying the costs and blah, 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 for that 1 millisecond in time where I now know that someone feels less lonely and maybe doesn't feel like I did in those first 6 months, that for me is what it's all about. And it's a really special thing. So yeah, I think that's what it is really for me.
Mate, that's beautiful. And actually to paraphrase your own name, like you should be really proud of that, because I think what we found it, I don't know if you feel the same, but it's almost like with our Patreon community, like we have this like community chat, and what's been so beautiful is like everyone in there has started talking, and then they organize like their own Zoom that we're not on, and they've now created this like sober book club that they want to do, and they're talking about literature, and we did a Zoom last night, and it's taken on a whole life of its own. And like we said when we started out, like if this helped one person, it's worth all the stress, all the money, everything's one person. So then to see like a community build itself off the back of a tiny little drop in the ocean that we've done, like to me that makes everything worthwhile. Because I saw one of my artists did it on stage the other day, actually. He was talking more about, you know, how to make people in the world feel more inclusive, but he said, you know, you as one person think that you might not make a difference, but there's 3,000 people in this room, so if each of you makes a positive change, then that's 3,000 positive impact. And I think that's same thing with like emotional vulnerability or like sobriety. Is like you on your own think you might not make an impact, but that one interaction you have could be a ripple effect for another one, and then that could be another 3, and then what you end up creating is almost just like tidal wave of just better energy in the fucking world, which ultimately I think all this comes down to is a lot of us got into certain habits because we didn't feel like we had the right energy or life we wanted.
I always think as well, I think by nature as a addict, I'll use that label for myself, because I think that is a pretty accurate description of me. If it's
9 a.m. wine,
if it's not alcohol, it's donuts, and if it's not donuts, it's ASOS, and you know, exactly,
100%.
But I do think that there's 2 things, right? The antidote, the opposite of addiction is connection. Is that famous kind of Johann Hari quote from Lost Connections, which is one of my favorite books. And then I think the other part is that if you can connect people and give them the opportunity in the space, then naturally humanity normally wins, because actually there are dickheads in the world, but they are the minority, and most people do just want to do good in the world, but sometimes people just need a little push to get there.
100%. I mean, you're now 6 years in?
6 years, yeah.
Amazing. So you've almost entered like sober Jedi territory, I would say.
Yeah, I consider myself, sober Kenobi.
Yeah, there we go. Just to kind of summarize, I suppose, like over the last 6 years, how have you found things like relationships, other things that you may have felt before, like anxiety, anything like that? How's everything kind of changed and shifted?
Relationships has been my hardest, definitely. And that's probably a whole other podcast, to be honest. It has been the wildest roller coaster for me, that one. I have got a partner now. We've been together for 2 years, who I love very dearly. But it has been hard work for me to get to a place where I was not only ready for a relationship, but ready for a relationship being sober. Ooh. That's the real.
You're like, what do you mean? We've got to communicate without a drink?
Yeah, exactly. Like vulnerability without medicating myself first. Are you mad? Like,
crazy.
And that really has been, I would consider like my life's work. Has been like the last year, I would say, for me in therapy has been the most intense. Because you really, it's that thing in relationships, right? Someone else mirrors back to you who you are, and that's not nice sometimes, especially when you're an addict like I have been, and there's parts of my character that I probably chose to ignore for a really long time because I didn't know that they were there. And then you go, oh wait, is that really who I am in the world? Like maybe I need to rethink that, and to dissect yourself and to pull yourself apart, all in the knowledge that hopefully you'll become a better person at the end of it is a gift. But it's not easy. I mean, there's been many a night where I've sat at home crying to Adele and kind of with a herbal tea.
The music, or is your cat called Adele?
Definitely the music. But now I want a cat called Adele, to be honest.
That's great.
Training to say hello. So yeah, I think relationships has definitely been my hardest thing. Genuinely, anxiety. Don't experience anxiety anymore.
Amazing.
Other than like things that make anyone anxious, I would say that like from where I was to where I am now, I mean, I was anxious on a daily basis. I would be kind of crippled with anxiety. A lot of that I now realize was because of some of the decisions that I was making. And the way that I always think about anxiety now is anxiety is my like nervous system's like alarm bells going, right, something's not right in your life. What is it in your life that's making you feel like this? Go and figure it out, Scott. Like that's the gift of sobriety for me, is because otherwise I would have just drank over it and wouldn't have cared.
Gives you the clues.
Whereas now, because I can go such long periods of time without anxiety, when it does come up, I'm like, oh, something's off. What is it? Who have you pissed off, or what have you said, or have you been an arsehole to someone at work by accident? Like, what is it? Figure it out, Scott, and then take some action. Yeah.
Amazing. You're looking at me. I love it when you look at me. What I meant to say was, I know when you look at me what's about to come out your mouth.
I love it when you look at me. Yeah, I think it might be time
for the big three.
I think it might be. So, for anyone...
We need some, hang on, just going to say, we need some fun. Next season, I want some music for this. You know, like in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and it goes...
Yeah.
We need that.
Well, we can do it.
Yeah.
It's not too late at all.
Perfect.
So, cue music. So, for anyone that's thinking about going on a journey of sobriety, what's your single best piece of advice?
Immerse yourself in it. And it's interesting because I said to you both on the way here that I was listening to your interview with Victoria Eames, and my answer has always been this to this question, but she basically said the exact same thing, and I was like, oh God, I can't follow a titan like her and say the same thing. But you know what? I'm just going to be true to myself. Like, that is it. Like, that was my experience. It's how I lived it. So that is what I would say to people. Listen to the podcasts, go to the panel talks if you can find them, watch YouTube, just anything to do with sobriety, just wrap yourself in it, and you will learn great things from people that have walked the path before you, and that ultimately is just follow that.
Fantastic. What is the single best thing that sobriety has given you?
Space. In that, and by that I mean space to, like, kind of what I was just describing there. Like, if I feel anxious about something, it gives me the space to pause and go, what's going on here? Let's figure it out. I wouldn't have had that without sobriety.
Amazing. Yeah, that's a good one we haven't had before.
Yeah.
So
Always
there
like
you
to be
go.
different.
That's 2 in a row. We've had two new
friend-
answers.
Which actually, we're approaching 80 episodes in. That's pretty rare. So
yeah, that's pretty
I love
good.
that. And finally,
And finally, we would love. I just want the EastEnders theme tune to come on now.
Yeah, let's do that.
Please.
You ain't my mother.
I'm dressed a bit cat today, am I? No, more Pat. I'm dressed
Oh
a
no,
bit
I
Pat.
sound like Pat with my cough, to be honest.
There you go. I should have got the dangly earrings. Anyway, right. We would love Scott to write a letter to drunk Scott. So what would you say to your former drunk self? If you could start, dear Scott.
Dear Scott, there is a life that you can't see yet waiting for you. It just takes a bit of courage. Listen to what other people have done before and go for it. Finn.
Love that. Mate, thank you
Yeah,
so
thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
We've been talking about getting you on for ages and it didn't align last season, so I'm buzzing
I'm
that
stoked that you've
you've done this.
Thank you for having
yeah,
me.
thank